What is the meaning of life? No. Well, there's sometimes that you can pursue a question by what it is, and there's other times that you can pursue it by what it's not. And today, in part, what we'll be looking at is what it's not. The meaning of life, we're going to find a little element here of what it's not. Now, when I worked at a hospital as a chaplain for a while, it was part of my training. I was able to sit with people, and it was one of the hardest pieces of pastoral training I've ever done. You learn a lot about yourself and your own reactions to what's going on in other people's lives and their grief and their hurt and pain, but fascinating, informing, and sometimes just so rewarding. But that was the first time I'd ever seen a dead body, not just like attending a funeral of somebody. The first time you get to sit with families who've just lost a loved one, and you're sort of wrestling with things in yourself or in your head and trying to figure out what to do or what to say and whatnot. So there's lots that you learn in a situation like that, especially over some time and repeated situations. But one of the things that was most tragic in that time was when I would come to engage with a family. I'd get a call from wherever in the hospital. Maybe it's down in the ICU or in Emerge that someone came in from an accident, or it could be someone up kind of who's in palliative care. It just, you never know what area someone's going to pass away in. But they'd call the chaplain, and I'd be called to go in and meet the family, talk to them, be with, pray with, be a presence for. But one of the most tragic parts was there was a few times that I would go in and very quickly realize that this is not a healthy dynamic of what's happening in here. There were some times when I would be called in, one time in particular when the patriarch of the family was on a ventilator and they were about to turn it off. Things had gone whatever way they needed, and it was time to wrap up. The family had gathered around the bedside. They had called the chaplain to come and be present. But man, when I went in there, the tension was thick, like you could cut it with a knife. And as you could hear and pick out things, you could hear there was this bitterness between siblings. And there was things going on there that were like, you step into this and you're like, whoa. But when it comes to somebody dying, especially a patriarch or a matriarch, there's inheritance often involved. And as much as we'd like to think people would be kind and honoring of the person who's dying, the focus in that room was absolutely not on the patriarch of the family who's about to expire. It was on who's getting what and how much. And this sister and that brother, they're squabbling because that one's getting more, this one's getting less, and how come they're getting that, and why? And you could just, oh my goodness. And it's so tragic. It's so tragic to be at the end of life. Can you imagine? But it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon. And so today we talk a little bit, we find an example a little bit from Jesus' day that was a little bit like this, talking about inheritance. And really at the root of it is greed. 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 So, let's read the text. This is found in Luke chapter 12, starting at verse 13. I'm just going to read the first couple verses here. We'll go 13 to 15. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Man, I love that. Jesus is like, man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? Why are you coming to me? Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. So fascinating. This guy's coming, it kind of looks like he's neutral or like but it's clearly not. The guy's trying to he's basically saying like, Jesus, take my side. Tell him to give me what I deserve. And Jesus is like, what are you bringing me into this for? Which, to be fair, at the time, sometimes when disputes would come up like this, they would go to a rabbi or a judge to try to help sort things out, according to the Old Testament law. But Jesus wasn't having it. He wasn't having this side taking, and then it's a bit of a slap in the face. Well, one, because the guy's coming to Jesus in a really sort of a demeaning manner to be like, tell him to Jesus, take my side. I'm right. Just trust me, I'm right. Now take my side. You're like, oh, okay, I'm going to boss Jesus around. And then Jesus totally kind of comes back with this slap in the face a bit, not physically, but okay, who made me judge over you? And then he says, well, watch out. Everyone, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Not like we see any examples of that around anywhere. But watch out. Be careful. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. And you're like, well, how many kinds of greed are there? Like, I haven't really heard. Like, what are the types of greed that we have? Well, I think there's more than we realize. And as I thought of the example, what I thought of is, here's the phrase to remember: the seeds of greed grow like weeds. Okay, the seeds of greed grow like weeds. And what comes to mind for me are dandelions. We're approaching dandelion season, hey? Everyone gets excited. Dandelion season is almost upon us. A few years ago, Leslie and I thought, well, you know what? Maybe they're not that bad. Let's just not do anything and see how it goes. And, it's probably not too bad. And we live on the backside of a green space, so that place is just acres of dandelions. And we found that, oh man, that was not a good move, right? Because I thought, well, really, how bad could it be? How bad could it get? Very bad. Very, very bad, let me tell you. When my neighbor came out with his spray, I was begging him, please, sir, have mercy on my lawn. And he did, and he came, and everything was okay within a short while. But I'm telling you, literally the kids didn't have grass to play on. They wanted to play soccer. They couldn't kick the ball because there were 50 dandelions were going flying. It was and the ball wouldn't even roll because it's through a forest of dandelions. So believe me, it matters. But I think greed is a little bit like this. What are all these types of greed Jesus is talking about? I can't tell you all of them, but I think it's like the seeds of greed grow like weeds, right? And some of what makes it so tricky is that they're lightweight, and they just float around. And they land wherever they land, and you don't even know they're there, but they've landed in your heart, and they've landed in your mind, and they've landed in your kids, and in your spouse, and in your neighbors, and they're just everywhere. And the greed just begins to pop up over here. It's not like a giant California redwood tree. No. But it's a full and thorough yellow crop of dandelions, ready to reproduce and bring you even more and spread it around a little bit. Let's share the greed, right? If we're all greedy, then what a society we have, right? We'll all be better off if we're more greedy. Maybe not. Be on your guard. Watch out, Jesus says. Watch out for all types of greed. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. So, then he tells a parable. So let's look at the parable here. verse 16, and he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place. Interesting. I have no place to store my crops. Really? No place? Let's keep reading. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns. Oh, wait, no place to store the crops. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And there I will store up my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool. You fool. A fool in the Bible is somebody who disregards the existence of God. In the Old Testament, if you're reading about that in the Proverbs, the fool is the person who doesn't acknowledge God. They pretend he doesn't exist, or they don't believe in him, or they live in all ways of their life, they live as though there is no God. And God says to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. I love Jesus' brilliance here. There's this juxtaposition of these guys come to talk to Jesus about their inheritance. Isn't that interesting? Someone died, and now they should be getting money. And Jesus tells them a story about somebody who's living and ends up dying and giving the money away, but has no say. So there's an interesting combination of things happening here. Let's keep going in 22. Because Jesus starts to tell what's at the root. Because he's warning about greed, and then he tells this story to warn them about greed. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. Then 22 says, then Jesus said to his disciples, therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. So I'm going to pause here. We started with that question. What is the meaning of life? Just that little question, right? Well, I can't answer the whole thing for you, but I can tell you what it's not. Right here he says, life is more than food and the body more than clothes. So sometimes as you're trying to discern something, it helps to know what things are not. To realize, like, you know what? I am not called to be a skydiver. Or I'm not called to, be an accountant. I know these things. Sometimes you learn what you're not called to do before you learn what you are called to do. And in this case, we can learn that the meaning of life is not about food and clothing. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you are than birds? Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. A couple of things. One, ravens. Jesus is using the examples of ravens and flowers. Ravens are a kind of bird. You probably know what a raven is, but in the Jewish culture, they're considered unclean. So as far as the bottom of the totem pole or the bottom of the pecking order, perhaps. Ravens are there. You're like, ooh, dirty birds. You don't want anything to do with them. But the point is being made, look, if God is even caring for those dirty birds, how much more will he care for you? And the grass and the field, flowers come and go, and they're so beautiful, and you just point out in your yard, you say, honey, look at the flowers. Oh, man, it's amazing. The peonies are coming in, and oh, it's so incredible. And you've got like maybe a week, and then they're gone, right? And then you're like, wow, that was amazing. But God cares and gives beauty and sustenance and provides flowers, and yet they're so fickle and fleeting. And yet God provides for them. So how much more will God provide for you? And he's not just saying God, he's saying your Father. Your Father. He's showing tenderness. Your Father cares for you so much more than those dirty birds and that throwaway grass. The flowers come and go. But your Father cares. You're so much more valuable. I was recently in Egypt, and I went to the pyramids. And the fascinating thing, talking about death and value and money and all this, like the pyramids were built as like burial sites. And they had all sorts of treasures stuck in there because they thought they could take it with them. They said, you're going to need this in the next life, so we're going to stock it full with everything you might need. And that's why they were raided. And the gold and the treasure and all those tales. And it's fascinating. But you know what? Like, I paid a couple of bucks to go in and climb up, and it's just this, it's very hot. And you end up in this room, the one that I was in, just this little room with an empty sarcophagus. And that's it. Now, it's a wonder of the world. And it's amazing. And how they made them is mysterious, and like, it's fascinating. But when you're talking about greed, and you're talking about wealth or worry, and that's really what's at the root. Whether we're facing death or life, whatever it is, we have worry at the root. So the seeds of greed grow like weeds, but the roots of these weeds are things like anxiety, worry, fear, selfishness, pride. All of these different things. Beware, be on your guard against all types of greed. But there's a compassion here as Jesus addresses the disciples. He tells them, hey, look, don't worry. Take a breath. Don't be anxious. He says, don't worry, do not worry, do not worry, do not worry. He says a number of times. Because what happens when we're worried and we're afraid, we start to grab. Right? If you've ever been in swimming lessons or observed lifeguards, you know that when a person is drowning and they're freaking out, you don't touch them. Let them freak out. When they get exhausted, you throw them the line, or especially if you're trying to swim out to them. I mean, you can throw them a lifeline, that's fine. But if you're going to go out and try to save someone who's drowning in the water, you don't do it while they're flailing about. Could you imagine trying to save me in the water when I'm freaking out? Any one of you up for that? That's why, because they're gonna fight you because they're drowning. Their body is just they don't even know, they can't control themselves, and they're just grabbing on. Next thing you know, 2 people have drowned instead of 1. When you feel like you're drowning in anxiety and worry and fear and concern about money and all these things, we just start grabbing for anything. Anything we can hold on to. And Jesus is saying, you don't have to do that. You don't have to be like that. You have a heavenly Father who loves you and cares about you. And there's a number of things we can extract from this, but when I think about where we're at, I mean, really, where we're at, man, with the news and all of these things and taxes and tariffs and elections and all sorts of stuff, and even all sorts of variety of opinions. But you know what? There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of worry. And while we don't connect those dots, those are the seeds. Those are the seeds of greed. If we let anxiety and worry and fear, we let those seeds land on us, and we don't brush them off, they start to sink in, just like dandelions. It doesn't take long. They sink in real fast. All of a sudden, you got a crop of dandelions growing. You got fears all over the place, anxieties all over the place, worries, concerns, selfishness. I better keep. Now, I'm not talking about, sure, we need to be wise. But Jesus is telling people who are in much worse state than us, much less wealthy than we are, and I can say that about all of us. If you have plumbing in your house, you are in a better shape than what the disciples were. So, if Jesus is telling them, who had so little and life was just so fragile, if he's telling them not to worry, I think we could probably say, yeah, I think he's saying that to us too. We don't have to live in worry and fear and anxiety. Those are the seeds of greed. The other thing that's interesting is I've never heard anybody admit to being greedy. We don't. We'll call it everything else. I'm just ambitious. I'm just a hard worker. I just, I can't sit still. That's fine. Some of you really, there's nothing wrong with hard work, and there's nothing wrong with having some ambition, but have you ever heard anybody say, actually, yeah, I'm kind of greedy? I just haven't ever heard it. Because, well, that's not me. If you were doing what I'm doing, that's greed. Or if they're doing it, that's greed. But not for me. You don't understand. I'm just trying to provide for my family. I want to give more to the church. So I need to make a lot more money. Whatever it is. But and this is the subtlety. This is the be on your guard against all kinds of greed. It's subtle. It's tricky. You won't think that you're greedy. Because it's you. And we're so good at justifying things in our own. But what you'll notice, or at least I should say, what I've noticed, is that there'll be little twinges where God will prick your conscience. Or there'll be something that will happen, and there'll be a little flare-up of greed. And you'll kind of be like, where did that come from? You find $20 in the no-frills parking lot. Someone asks you to borrow $5. You're like, nope. You're like, well, wait a minute. I just found $20. 30 seconds ago, I didn't have it. 30 seconds later, somebody asked me for $5. And I'm lying, saying, I don't have any money. I'm willing to lie, and I now have fully embraced that $20 is mine. And you're like, oh, it's a little Gollum there, right? Like, what happened? You didn't have the $20 5 seconds ago. How is this? Maybe that's just me. Maybe you'll find something else. There'll be little flare-ups of greed. You're like, oh, I'm glad nobody saw that. That was, be on your guard, though. Be on your guard. If that's the case, give the whole thing away. Go give the 20 right away. Don't let those seeds settle in. The thing with weeds is you have to get down to the root. I weed whip, right? You do all the dandelions. There, took care of those for 24 hours. Then the next day, they're back even more. Do it again. Like, you know, if you're going to get rid of the weeds, you got to get them out by the root. It's the same with greed. So how do we do that? Here's the last little section of the passage I want to get to. 32. Do not be afraid, little flock. What a loving shepherd, eh? Don't be afraid, little flock. Don't be worried. For your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. I would even say, thinking of the periods, no tomb raiders will come and take it either. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Part of how we know if we're experiencing greed, there's some things that are telling in our hearts, like I described. But the other thing is your pocketbook. Like, how are you in generosity? Are you a generous person? Anyway, I think part of how we dig up the roots of greed is we practice generosity. It's directly counteractive, counterintuitive. It's the antithesis of greed. Giving instead of taking, instead of hoarding. So generosity is one of those ways to uproot greed. Generosity is like perennials. It takes intention, right? The weeds will blow in very easily. But if you're going to have generosity, it takes intention. You have to choose to plant that, right? It'd be great if generosity came as easily as the dandelions. But they don't. It doesn't. But if you uproot the weeds and you plant something that should be there, even if you use the example of grass, if you have a good and healthy lawn and you've taken care of it and you're doing stuff to nurture good and healthy grass, dandelions just don't grow as much because it's good and healthy and you're nurturing it with the things that it needs. And I think generosity is one of the main tools and one of the things he says right here that helps counteract greed. He again affirms to not be afraid. Your Father, don't be afraid, little flock. Your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near, no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If we go back to verse 31, I also want to, that's sort of the next piece. Back to 31. Seek his kingdom. This is the other sort of step 2 for practice generosity, be intentional about that, but seek his kingdom. Seek first his kingdom. And these things will be given to you as well. It's talking about priorities. It's talking about priorities. We're called to seek God's kingdom first. When we're greedy and we're afraid, and to be fair, sometimes, look, Jesus gets right at the anchor. Like, it's not just going around calling people greedy. He knows what's underneath. What's underneath is worry and anxiety and fear. And that's why you're greedy. She said, well, hey, I want to deal with what's down here. Not on the surface, not the symptoms, not the greed. Friends, don't be anxious and worried. You have a tender and loving Heavenly Father. And if you seek God's kingdom first, if you put things in the proper priority, you'll get the things you need. Sometimes that's not enough for us because, and this is a little bit where the greed comes in, right? Well, yes, but I need the premium edition. Will God provide me with the premium edition? I need the deluxe version because I'm getting older and I just need those comforts. Like, well, he doesn't talk about premium versions or deluxe. He does say food and clothing, your basic needs. He addresses that. He said God will provide. Doesn't say anything about the premium editions. That's the seeds of greed that are so spread through. If you have a premium edition vehicle, by the way, or a car or stereo, whatever, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying, when you think about greed, this is the little bits of how. Just yesterday I was talking with a few guys about, and they were saying, like, I wish I could buy a basic truck. Like, I wish I could buy a truck that had those handles where you could roll down a window. Things that your kids may have not ever seen. They're like, I don't want so many things break. Everything's electronic. I can't fix it. You're like, you can't buy basic now. But we're called to say, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, friends. Be intentional about generosity and seek first the kingdom. Seek first the kingdom. And if you were here for Pastor Gary's sermons, or if you want to go back and listen, he had a helpful description of that, of saying the kingdom of God is living under the authority of God. That there's a difference, right? There's a difference to being a religious person who practices religious things, and a difference between that and a follower of Jesus. A follower of Jesus is willing to submit to God's authority, which is part of living in the kingdom. We live this life as though Jesus is really Lord, as though God is really on the throne and in control of things, and that God has a say in what happens in the universe. And if we live like that, it's really odd to the people who don't. Why would you do that? But if you seek first the kingdom, it's living under God's authority. To say, I believe that Jesus really is who he said he is, that I'm going to submit to what he says. When he says things, and when I read things in the Word, I'm going to obey. That's living, seeking first the kingdom. And when we seek to do things God's way, when we seek to live under his authority, the rest comes along. He said, I'll take care of you. These things will be given to you as well. We'll cover your basic needs. And that tell at the very end is, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And when we find our hearts straying, longing for so many other things, places and stuff, when we start to think that, like the people around us, even though they may not say it, but when we look at our advertising and the way we're living, we think the meaning of life does consist about the possessions we have. And how many people feel anxious and stressed because they're overextended or they couldn't quite get the thing that would beat what their neighbor has. No, don't go chasing after all those things. Seek first the kingdom, and all these things will be added to you. God will care for you. And bring your worries, bring your anxieties. When things are going crazy and you're reading the latest news report and the stocks are down and the stress is up, come to your Heavenly Father. That's where you need to be having your conversation first, not on social media. Right? Come, sit at his feet. Let him calm your fears as you tell him all the horrible things, all the things that are making you anxious. And let him give you his peace. And let him show you where you can be generous. And when he does prompt you to do that, obey. Listen. That will help you take the roots of those weeds out and plant something new and fresh in your life. Don't let the seeds of greed grow like a weed. Instead, practice generosity and seek first his kingdom. Let's pray.